Some people are remembered for what they did. Others, for what they caused. But there are a rare few, those whose very existence bends the world around them. Helen was one of them. The woman whose beauty would make poets weep. Whose love would shatter kingdoms. Whose life would become the axis of the greatest war ever told. But before she became the Queen of Sparta, before Paris saw her in a dream, before she walked willingly or unwillingly toward Troy, Helen was a child of myth, a daughter of Zeus. And her story begins long before the fire that consumed Troy. Long before Helen became the most desired woman in the world, Zeus looked upon earth and saw beauty. A beauty in the form of Leda, Queen of Sparta, graceful, gentle, adorned with a quiet strength. One spring evening, a swan descended from the clouds, pure white, wings shimmering with divine radiance. But this was no ordinary swan. It was Zeus. And from this union of mortal and god, 2 eggs were laid, glowing faintly with celestial warmth. From these eggs emerged 4 children. Castor, Polydeuces, also known as Pollux, Clytemnestra, and the child who would stun the world, Helen. Helen from her earliest years seemed touched by something beyond mortal understanding. Sunlight lingered on her skin longer than on others. Flowers bloomed when she walked past. Even as a child, her face had a quiet radiance. A beauty not made for the mortal world. A beauty that would shape destiny itself. But beauty is never born without consequence. And Helen was no exception. As Helen grew, her beauty spread like wildfire across Greece. Heroes whispered her name. Kings spoke of her in awe. Poets already began crafting verses about a girl barely reaching womanhood. When Helen was still young, barely of marriageable age, the legendary Athenian king Theseus heard tales of her beauty. Theseus, hero of the Minotaur, conqueror of Amazons, slayer of beasts. But even he was not immune. One day, he arrived in Sparta. Not to court her, but to take her. Abduction? He and his close friend Pirithous seized Helen and carried her away to Attica, believing she was destined to be his queen. Yet destiny had other plans. Her brothers, the famed Dioscuri, Castor, and Pollux, chased Theseus across the lands. They reclaimed Helen, a young girl shaken but unharmed. But this event, this first attempt to claim her, was only a warning. A sign of what was to come. For Helen would never be allowed a simple life. Her beauty had become a beacon. And soon, every man in Greece would try to claim her. Helen matured into womanhood. And the world changed around her. Poets later wrote, she was the face that launched 1,000 ships. But her beauty was more than physical. There was a calm in her eyes. A grace in her movements. A warmth in her voice. She carried an aura that softened even the hardest hearts, yet ignited fire in others. Some called it divine charm. Others called it a curse. In marketplaces, people stopped speaking when she passed. Sailors carried stories of her across the sea. Sculptors tried and failed to capture her likeness. Queens feared her. Kings desired her. Helen herself did not choose this life. But destiny rarely asks for permission. It simply unfolds. When Helen reached the proper age, Tyndareus, king of Sparta and Helen's earthly father, announced her marriage. This was not just a royal wedding. This was the greatest gathering of suitors ever recorded in Greek myth. From every kingdom, every fortress, every distant shore, heroes came. Warriors, kings, princes, demigods. At least 100 suitors stood in the Spartan palace, all seeking her hand. Among them, Menelaus, Prince of Mycenae. Ajax the Greater, colossal and unshakable. Ajax the Lesser, swift and proud. Diomedes, King of Argos, fierce and strategic. Odysseus, clever King of Ithaca. Patroclus, loyal companion of Achilles. Idomeneus, future hero of Troy. And even envoys from distant lands, carrying gifts of gold and promises of peace. The hall was filled with tension. The slightest insult could spark bloodshed. For how do you choose from 100 kings and heroes? Tyndareus hesitated. He feared that choosing one suitor meant making 99 enemies. Enemies powerful enough to unite and destroy Sparta. And so, the most cunning man in the hall stepped forward. Odysseus. Odysseus did not come for Helen. He wanted something else. The hand of Penelope. And so he offered Tyndareus a solution, one that would bind every king in the room. A bargain. Odysseus said,
"Make all the suitors swear an unbreakable oath to defend the husband Helen chooses against any man who should challenge him."
This meant no war between suitors, no grudges, no betrayal, and if anyone dared abduct Helen, the entire Greek world would rally to bring her back. Tyndareus agreed. And so every suitor, every king, every warrior, every prince, placed his hand over a sacrificed horse and swore the most binding sacred oath in Greek history. To defend the chosen husband of Helen, even at the cost of my life. The oath would later summon these kings, this entire army, to the shores of Troy. But that part of the story had not yet arrived. Now came the choice, and the world held its breath. When the moment arrived, Helen walked forward. The suitors parted like waves before a ship. She studied them carefully. Ajax with his towering might. Diomedes with his warlike stance. Idomeneus with his regal confidence. Odysseus with his sharp, calculating gaze. Menelaus with his quiet strength and kind demeanor. Helen did not choose the strongest, nor the cleverest, nor the wealthiest. She chose Menelaus, Prince of Mycenae, brother of Agamemnon. A man known not for boasting, but for loyalty, discipline, and steady honor. A man who would protect her. A man who loved her not as an object of legend, but as a woman. Menelaus stepped forward, humbled. And in that moment, the fate of nations settled into place. The suitors accepted the choice. The oath held firm. Peace settled, temporarily. A grand feast erupted across Sparta. The marriage of Menelaus and Helen became one of the most celebrated unions in Greek history. But beneath the golden light, beneath the wine and laughter, destiny waited. For a queen of Sparta would not remain in Sparta forever. Helen adjusted to her new role with grace. As queen, she was adored. She walked the palace halls like a living goddess, yet she carried a humility that made her beloved by the people. Menelaus proved gentle and devoted. He treated her with respect, trusted her wisdom, and honored her lineage. Together, they ruled Sparta in peace. But the gods were not finished with her. For beauty given by the gods is never free. Aphrodite watched Helen from Olympus, a silent guardian, a silent architect of fate. She knew what was coming. She knew of Paris's judgment. She knew of the promise she made on Mount Idaho. Helen was marked. Menelaus sensed something too, a distant storm forming far across the Aegean as if the world trembled beneath destiny's weight. For Helen's life had always been two stories. One written by mortals, and one whispered by gods. Those stories were about to collide. While Helen lived in peace, across the sea Paris made preparations. Guided by Aphrodite. Driven by the promise of love. Compelled by fate. He set sail for Sparta. The winds favored him. The sea carried him gently. As if the world itself wanted this meeting. When Paris arrived, Menelaus received him warmly. Hospitality was sacred in Greece. And Paris, handsome, polite, charming, won the hearts of many. Including Helen. Whether by divine influence or genuine connection or a mixture of both. Helen felt drawn to him. Their conversations lingered. Their eyes met often. Their bond deepened. Some say she resisted. Some say she surrendered willingly. Some say her mind was clouded by Aphrodite. But one thing was certain. Paris had come to claim what was promised. Helen's heart felt torn. She had lived a life shaped by others. Desired for her beauty. Taken by Theseus as a girl. Chosen by Menelaus. Watched by the gods. Bound by an oath she did not choose. And now Paris, gentle, poetic, mysterious Paris, stood before her. A man who looked at her not as a queen. Not as a prize. But as a soul longing for connection. Aphrodite whispered in Helen's dreams, promising love, destiny, and passion beyond mortal comprehension. Helen became restless. Her steps grew slower. Her gaze distant. Her thoughts filled with the young prince from Troy. The palace began to sense it. Even Menelaus sensed it. But fate cannot be outrun. One morning, as sunlight broke over Sparta, Helen made a choice. A choice that would shake the foundations of the world. Before the war. Before the ships. Before the 10-year siege. There was a woman whose beauty bent destiny. A queen who carried the weight of God's promises. A child of Zeus marked from birth. Helen's story had only begun. The next chapter would not be peaceful. It would not be gentle. It would not be quiet. For soon, Paris would take Helen from Sparta, willingly or unwillingly, and the oath of the suitors would ignite the greatest war mankind had ever seen. And that is where destiny leads us next. Episode 5, Paris in Sparta, The Forbidden Love. How Paris seduced or kidnapped Helen.